Hey everyone, Blizzard released the patch notes for Season 5, and I am really excited for the Sorcerer this season. Got a ton of buffs, so we are actually going to build a Fireball Sorcerer in this video. The reason we're going to build a Fireball Sorcerer in this video is because the Staff of Endless Rage and the Gloves of the Illuminator got huge buffs, and I think it's actually going to make this build viable. So we are building on max roll. I use the Fireball Sorcerer Endgame guide that they have on here, which is a great guide. I definitely recommend checking it out as the base of this build, and we are making changes from there. There are some base changes to the Sorcerer that you should know about. The most important one is that last season they added kind of like a baseline damage bonus for your main stat. And they actually increased that this season by about 20%. So last season, every 10 intelligence, you got 1% damage. And now it's only every 8 intelligence. So stacking intelligence this season is going to be even more powerful than it was in the past. We also got some new unique items and legendary aspects. The one that I found the most interesting for early game is this aspect of elemental acuity. So basically using fire, shock, or frost skills is going to greatly increase your mana regeneration. And if you cast all three, you're going to get up to 120% increased mana regeneration for 10 seconds, and then it's going to reset. This might be better than using like Prodigy's aspect, which is the one where when you cast a cooldown, you gain some mana. And then there's a Pyromancy one that we're going to use in the early game as well. So maybe this, along with one of those other mana boosting skills early game, is going to be better than the other two. We'll have to test it out. I didn't get a chance to try this on the PTR. So this is an end game Fireball build. I'm not going to go through how to level this up. I think the most important thing for leveling up the build is to make sure you have mana. If you don't have mana, then you're not dealing damage. So like I said, Prodigy's aspect, maybe aspect of elemental acuity, and the Pyromancy one, which does the same thing. In the end game, because this Staff of Endless Rage has been updated, we're going to be using the Staff of Endless Rage. The huge damage increase, 170% fire damage as an innate stat instead of as a aspect. It got rid of damage to crowd-controlled enemies, but that's much more specific than fire damage. We're always doing fire damage, and maybe we're not always doing damage to crowd-controlled enemies. They added a huge intelligence buff. Now they added 2 temper style abilities, fireball projectile speed, which is really nice, and chance for fireball projectiles to cast twice. So previously you didn't want to use this because like a weapon and an offhand was much better because you could have 2 fireball projectiles cast twice tempers. Now we are giving up the chance to crit temper, so this could end up not as good as 2 items, but I think it's still very good. And the other thing we're getting is +6 to Fireball, which is incredible. We're going to be able to stack so many pluses to Fireball, and that's a huge damage increase because everything else, all of our damage multipliers scale off of the +6 to Fireball. Now, I'm not going to totally get into the Paragon board, but one thing I wanted to note about this fire damage, they changed the Searing Heat legendary node for Season 5, so it caps now at 60%, and your bonus is increased by 20% of your damage with fire. So this 170% fire damage bonus is going to get us halfway to that 60%, which is awesome. All right, so that was the first item. But yeah, with the updates, it's a little bit longer. The Gloves of the Illuminator also got some changes that are going to help us out. They increased the critical strike chance property. It goes up to 11% now. They added fireball attack speed, which is really nice. Or they increased the fireball attack speed. And we got a new ability, +2 mana when a fireball explodes. So I think in the late game, this is really going to help with our mana problems and let us switch out those mana aspects quicker. Prodigy's aspect, Pyromancy aspect if we're using that, or the elemental acuity that we talked about earlier. And we're also getting some more ranks to Fireball, or the same ranks to Fireball. And the other thing is they've reduced the penalty. So at the best version of these, you're going to have a 0% damage penalty, which is great. I like this +2 to mana when a fireball explodes. We're using Staff of Endless Rage. It's going to launch 2 additional projectiles, and then with Gloves of the Illuminator, it explodes each time it bounces. So we're going to get a bunch of explosions, and we're going to get 2 mana for each of those explosions. Very interesting. Now for the rest of the build, we're going to be using Godslayer Crown. It's a huge damage output, 60% increased damage for 3 seconds, and they've actually changed this so that against bosses, you don't have to crowd control them to get that increased damage. You just have to hit them. So immediately when we attack a boss, we're going to get a 60% damage bonus, and it's going to help us take down bosses so much easier. They've added plus to all stat. They've increased the bottom end of the maximum life affix. They've added 60% damage to elites instead of just straight damage. So that's a bit of a nerf. And they've added increased cooldown reduction and got rid of the crowd control duration, which that's totally fine. They've also changed the image, which is cool. For our chest piece, we're going to be using the aspect of concentration. So casting a conjuration skill grants you 25% damage reduction for 5 seconds. This is going to be a nice damage reduction bonus because we are going to be using ice blades. For our pants, we're going to be using Tybalt's Will. Tybalt's Will is a staple. We're dealing increased damage while unstoppable, which we're going to be unstoppable from using Flame Shield. We're going to gain some primary resource. They've gotten rid of the potion capacity, which was basically useless, added all stat. They've added maximum life, which is always nice. They've left the maximum resource, and they've added damage reduction while unstoppable, which for us is not super useful, but still nice. And they've gotten rid of the plus to damage, which that's okay too. For our boots, we're going to be using Esu's Heirloom. They've increased the movement speed affix on these. They've lowered the movement speed after killing an elite, but they've increased the duration. So these are going to be active for longer, which is nice. Or not active for longer, but more powerful for longer. They've added, increased the critical strike damage property, and they've added resistance to all elements instead of mana cost reduction. I think losing the mana cost reduction is going to be totally fine, again, because we have that interesting +2 to mana from when we cast Fireball now. They've increased the top end of the critical strike chance, which is really nice, and they've clarified the current bonus to be what your actual bonus is, which is nice. For our amulet, we're going to be using the aspect of 3 curses. This increases your critical strike damage with Fireball by up to 60%, and it's doubled against healthy targets. So the first time you hit a target, you're going to have 120% increased critical strike damage. We're going to be using the conceited aspect on our first ring, 25% increased damage while you have a barrier. And then for our other ring, we're going to be using Talrash's Iridescent Loop. It's a very good ring. This has been updated as well. The lucky hit chance affix has been increased to cap at 8%. We're getting a huge bonus to non-physical damage up to 75%. Cooldown reduction has been increased to cap at 8% instead of 7%. And we're getting 2 ranks of Potent Warding, which is casting a skill grants it's 3% all resistance and 2% maximum resistance to that skill's element for 9 seconds. And then they've increased the top end of the damage to 20% per element. So now it caps at 80% instead of 60%. So that's the gear. Let's get into the skill tree. We're going to be taking 2 ranks of Firebolt. 1 rank of Firebolt and 1 rank of Enhanced Firebolt, because this is going to be in our enchantment slot so that we give burning damage to our enemies. Fireball does not do burning damage. We're obviously going to be capping Fireball as much as possible, so 5 ranks, Enhanced Fireball, and we're going for Destructive Fireball because we don't really do that much burning damage, except for the Firebolt. That's really the only way. We're going to get 3 ranks of Potent Warding, and we're going to get some extra ranks here. We're getting 1 rank of Devastation, 3 ranks of Elemental Dominance. We're going to get Flame Shield, but only the first level of it. We're going to put 5 ranks into Teleport to get that cooldown as low as possible, Enhanced Teleport and Shimmering Teleport for the damage reduction. We're going to get Ice Armor, Enhanced Ice Armor, and then Shimmering Ice Armor to reduce the cooldown as much as possible. And then we're getting Frost Nova, Enhanced Frost Nova, and Mystical Frost Nova. The reason for this is that we do have a little bit of a hard time in this build getting vulnerable damage up, and Frost Nova is one way to do that. We're also getting 3 ranks of Glass Cannon and 1 rank of Elemental Attunement. We're going to get a rank of Ice Blades. This is going to pair with our concentration aspect to get some damage reduction. It's also going to give us some cooldown, and that cooldown is going to go with our other skills. And Ice Blades is also another way to make enemies vulnerable, which is really nice. We're going to get 1 rank of Align the Elements, 3 ranks of Mana Shield, and 3 ranks of Protection. Mana Shield was updated, so the damage reduction was increased from 8% per rank to 10%, so this is actually going to give us 30% damage reduction for 5 seconds. Align the Elements, the damage reduction cap was increased to 60% from 40%. If you don't fight elites for a while, you're going to end up with 60% damage reduction against elites. Then down in the mastery tree, we're getting 3 ranks of inner flames. It's increased pyromancy skill damage. We're getting 3 ranks of devouring blaze, increased critical strike damage against burning enemies. And remember, everyone's going to be burning from our firebolt enchantment. We're skipping the ultimate skills, which feels really bad. I think in the early game, you are going to want to take Inferno and go all the way to Supreme Inferno, because then you can freely cast Fireball for that, 8 seconds while this is going off. But in the endgame, we're not going to use that. We're going to get 1 rank of Fiery Surge, which gives us some 15% mana regeneration for 3 seconds. We're going to get 3 ranks of Soulfire. Pyromancy skills cost less mana and deal increased damage. We want all those damage multipliers we can get. And then we're going to get Esu's Ferocity. Critical strike damage is increased. And then if you critical strike and kill an enemy, you get both bonuses for 3 seconds, which is really nice. So for our gear, I didn't mention, but you're going to be putting rubies in all your armor, emeralds in your weapon, and skulls in your rings, or rings and necklace. I'm not going to get too much into the Paragon board, but there were some changes. Searing Heat was updated and made a lot better. Frigid Fate was also updated and made a lot better, and Frigid Fate might make sense to take in this build. It's really about your cold skill damage, which you can get on the Paragon board. I'm not going to fully go into this Paragon board. It's pretty similar to the one from the Fireball Sorcerer endgame build on Maxroll already. So yeah, I'm definitely excited for Season 5. It's cool that they made some of these uniques actually playable and very useful. So I'm excited to try the build out. Let me know in the comments what you think about the build, and thanks for watching.